Surely that cannot be right. Isn't that less than the minimum wage? Can you investigate, please?
We here at More or Less love nothing more than a good investigation, although I can answer some of Rupert's questions right away. Yes, that is less than the minimum wage, which is £9.50 an hour for people aged 23 and over. That's about £17,000 or £18,000 a year if you work full time. But barristers are self-employed, so the minimum wage does not apply to them. Still, £12,200 isn't much for what's generally viewed as a high-skilled, high-status profession, so is that number accurate? All rise for Charlotte MacDonald!
Oh, sit down and don't be silly, Tim.
Okay, well, Charlotte, where does this statistic come from?
It's from the Bar Council, in conjunction with the Ministry of Justice as part of a recent review into the funding of legal aid.
Aren't the Bar Council the people who've called the strike?
No, the striking body is the Criminal Bar Association. The Bar Council is different, although of course they do represent the interests of barristers. The figure focuses on barristers who are working exclusively on criminal cases paid by legal aid and who are in the first 3 years of practice. It's based on earnings for the financial year 2019 to 20. This £12,200 actually refers to the median profit made by a barrister. So that's income after unavoidable expenses, including professional indemnity insurance, barristers' chambers fees, and travelling around the country to represent clients anywhere from Swansea to Newcastle. Both the Bar Council and the Ministry of Justice agree that those expenses are around 30% of total fees of around £18,000 a year. So £12,200 is the profit that's left. Barristers would insurance and possibly a small amount of tax out of that figure, and it doesn't include a pension.
The amount they actually take home will be even lower.
Yes, but we should say £12,200 is probably on the lower end of estimates. We spoke to the head of research at the Bar Council who helped compile these figures, and she told us there's a different way of measuring depending on who exactly you count as an early career full-time legal aid criminal barrister. This slightly different approach gives us a median income of about £17,500 a year. Both of these figures are recognised by the Ministry of Justice.
So maybe the best number is £12,200 a year, maybe it's £17,500 a year. Which barristers you include when you're trying to figure this out?
That's right. Either way, it's probably less than you thought a barrister might earn. The first figure below what someone working full-time on the minimum wage would expect to earn, while the second is just below it. And these are median figures, so half of early years barristers would earn less.
These numbers describe average earnings for a criminal barrister working on legal aid cases in their first 3 years. Do they earn a lot more after that early career stage?
We know that after a few years in the profession, criminal barristers' earnings do rise quite fast. For criminal barristers who have between 3 to 7 years under their belt, their profit, the figure after essential expenses are deducted, rises to between £46,000 and £50,000.
Right, so that is well above the average UK salary, although I'm sure there are plenty of qualified lawyers who make more. But why do criminal barristers in their first 3 years have such a low income?
Well, as you said, Tim, criminal barristers, like almost all barristers, are self-employed. This means they don't get a fixed yearly salary from an employer. They don't even get an hourly rate. Instead, they get paid fixed fees through the government's legal aid system. I spoke to Kate Rigstina, a criminal barrister in her 4th year of practice.
We get paid a fixed fee per hearing or per trial, depending on the type of trial that you're dealing with. So for a standard appearance in the Crown Court under the government scheme, we get paid £91. For a bail application, it's £91. For a sentencing hearing, it's £126. Now, those fees don't depend on how much work you put into them. They are standard set fees that no matter what offence you are dealing with, no matter how much work there is behind the scenes, you just get paid for the hearing.
Barristers at the beginning of their careers are not experienced enough to take on more serious cases, like prosecuting or defending a murder trial. So in the early years, they end up representing defendants in hearings which have lower set fees, such as bail or sentencing hearings. But they still need to get across all the evidence and material for these hearings, plus talking to the defendant and preparing material, all of which takes several hours.
So I'm wondering, Is the problem then that in their first few years they struggle to get enough work?
I'll let Kate answer that one.
Goodness me, no. Everyone knows about the cases in the backlog because these junior barristers, in the first 3 years of their practice, they are working ungodly hours. I remember myself, you stay up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning sometimes, agonizing over every little thing that you have to do the next day. So it's not like you don't have the work, there's plenty of work.
Another problem is they don't typically get paid until a case has finished.
I'm right now getting paid for cases that I did in 2019, 2020. So in the first 3 years, you're just lucky if you get paid.
That's why income starts to rise a few years after going into practice. In the 4th or 5th year, they're finally being paid for work they did in the 2nd or 3rd year.
Okay, so criminal barristers in their first few years are taking on hearings which have a relatively low fee attached, but lots of hours of prep, and then they're often not paid for that work for a long time, and sometimes not for a few years.
Exactly.
Well, on the other hand, they get to be in steamy courtroom dramas. Nobody ever makes steamy courtroom dramas about economists. Don't know what they're complaining about.
Not everyone gets your little jokes, Tim.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Charlotte. It's the end of an era. Boris Johnson has left 10 Downing Street. In his final speech as Prime Minister, he listed a host of achievements. It's always good to hear about those 40 new hospitals again. And here's one that caught our attention.
The rollout of gigabit broadband up over the last 3 years, I'm proud to say, since you were kind enough to elect me, from 7% of our country's premises having gigabit broadband to 70% today.
A number of our listeners are sceptical about those figures, so we decided to look into them. The Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, or DCM, has indeed showing that gigabit coverage was about 8% in 2019 when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, and it is now about 70%. Their source is an independent internet research site called Think Broadband, and if you check the data on Broadband's website, then DCMA are correct. So it sounds like progress has been made, but what does it mean to say that we now have 70% gigabit coverage? Gigabit is a definition of a speed that you can get across broadband technology. A gigabit connection transmits data at 1 billion bits per second, and that's pretty fast. In principle, you should be able to download an entire movie in about a minute at that speed. It is true to say that in 2019, about 8% of people had access to these speeds, and now it's 70%. But there is a caveat or two. It's worth noting, for example, that back in 2019, the Conservative manifesto said,
"We intend to bring full fibre and gigabit-capable broadband to every home and business across the UK by 2025.
Full fibre and gigabit. So why isn't the government talking about full fibre anymore? We spoke to Andrew Ferguson, who is editor at thinkbroadband.com.
Full fibre is one of the broadband technologies out there and is generally considered the gold standard around the globe. It's what everyone's trying to build a lot of in every country. Full fibre means they actually have to install a bit of very thin glass from the street into your house to actually be connected and be actually live with it.
And this type of network is more reliable and faster than older, more traditional networks, and it can easily achieve gigabit speeds. OpenReach and other providers have been extending full fibre coverage across the country. But in total, that only reaches
40% of premises.
40%. So, how do we get this figure of 70% gigabit coverage? Virgin Media, the largest network in the country, has a small amount of full fibre but uses a different type of wiring for most of its network. That's not as reliable as full fibre, but thanks to a recent upgrade, it is just about fast enough to nudge into the gigabit category. And that upgrade is what has so dramatically improved the statistics on gigabit coverage.
If you look at just the graphs, yes, it is impressive. You have to look at it, though, as in a big chunk of this has been helped by Virgin Media upgrading the network from version 3.0 to version 3.1. So they went from having a network where the maximum speed was around 500 megabits per second to now that 1.1 gigabits per second if you choose to buy that package. That happened over the period of 2020, 2021. So by the end of 2021, we were already in the 60, 65% gigabit coverage level.
What you're saying is that a lot of this increase has come because Virgin Media have upgraded their network. So if I was a Virgin Media customer and Virgin Media upgraded the network, I've automatically got access to it.
No, you're still using the same You're still on the old DOCSIS 3.0 network. The only way to get onto what is considered the gigabit network is to actually subscribe to their Gig 1 service. Unfortunately, it comes with a price tag in around the £60 a month mark, so clearly a lot of people are going to opt for cheaper.
Do we have any idea how many people in that 70% have actually taken up that option?
It's very difficult to pin it down, and this is where we all get quite vague and woolly. But using the data that we have from speed tests that the public run, we see somewhere between 2 to 4% of speed tests suggesting that people have actually got a gigabit type connection.
Well, this seems kind of important. So more than 2/3 of the country have got access to this gigabit speed, but you're saying only a few percent are actually using it?
Yes.
And that's for people on Virgin's main network. Andrew says it's complicated for those with full fibre.
For full fibre, it's a little bit different because you can get a lot of the benefits. When you join a full fibre package, even if you join it at only 30 megs, you're still getting all the reliability, so you don't have to pay a fortune. So if we include those, the number goes up to, we think, around the 15-70% mark.
15 or 17%. Now, Virgin Media say they're going to upgrade their whole network to full fibre by 2028. But all this makes me wonder, what's the government's role in this achievement? We contacted the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport to ask. We were told the government wasn't taking credit for doing the upgrades to the networks, it was championing those upgrades. A spokesman said,
"Our investment and measures to help telecoms firms speed up their rollout, such as making it easier to build infrastructure, backing start-up firms, and directly funding almost 750,000 connections in hard-to-reach areas, have seen gigabit broadband coverage rocket in recent years. We are also leading the biggest ever government investment in broadband, with a record £5 billion to ensure hard-to-reach areas are not left behind."
The government's putting money directly into schemes to help develop networks in areas that commercial companies have not shown much interest in going to, mostly rural, sparsely populated areas. And that's obviously important for those communities. But according to Andrew's figures, it's not a large proportion of the number that the government has been highlighting. Only 2% of the 70% figure is a result of government-funded schemes to build new full fibre networks to achieve gigabit speeds. Thanks to Andrew Ferguson of thinkbroadband.com, and thanks also to National Treasurer Rory Keflin-Jones for his help with that item. That's all we have time for this week. Please keep your questions and comments coming in to moreorless@bbc.co.uk. We will be back next week, and until then, goodbye.
And More or Less was presented by Tim Harford. The producer was John Bethry. Now on BBC Radio 4, the star of RuPaul's Drag Race UK, Cheryl Hole, shares a love letter to her favourite layered food. What could it be?
I'm Andy Oliver, and this is One Dish, the BBC Radio 4 series about what makes our favourite foods so special. Every episode, I'll be joined by a delightful guest who's bringing a dish that means a lot to them, literally, to the table, and explaining to me, and of course to you, why they love it so much. Is it nostalgia that makes it taste so good, or is there magic in the chemistry of how we blend the ingredients? In this show, we'll unpack the history behind some of the foods that we love the most, and food psychologist Kimberly Wilson will give us the lowdown on what's going on at a molecular level in the dish as well.
I had a chance to travel to Egypt to meet him in person. He died. In this episode, we're using recordings from interviews he did with the BBC 20 years ago. Over the phone, Essaoury told me that the next time he had contact with Salman Rushdie was 18 months later, in September 1990, after he saw the author being interviewed on the South Bank show.
You know, it's been hell. And there are great losses in it. I mean, for example, the thing that has always been of central importance in my writing is the city of Bombay. And, you know, God knows when I'll ever be able to go there again.
I mean, this man claims to be an atheist. And now he's saying, God knows when will I walk the streets of Bombay again. What's an atheist man talking about that for?
By this time, the fatwa had been issued, and Rushdie was in hiding, so Essaoury called Mel Bragg, the presenter of the South Bank show, to pass a message to the author, asking him to get in touch, and they began a relationship over the phone.
And he would phone me almost every night for a pretty long time. I can't believe it.
They certainly spent a lot of time talking to her.
That's El Essaoury's wife, and she remembers a story he recounted to me too, about how one night she'd been cutting his toenail.
This toenail thing, yes. I was a chiropodist. Even if I hadn't been, I think I'd possibly have cut Hisham's toenails. He had difficulty reaching his toenails. And one time at home, I was already cutting his nails and Salman called him. They were chatting, and I think I was a little bit harsh, and Hisham squeaked.
What was that? Asked Salman. Oh, it's just my wife cutting my toenails, Essaoury replied.
And Salman laughed, and he said, oh, my wives have never offered to cut my toenails. And it was just a light-hearted exchange. It really didn't mean very much.
Rushdie later recalled this incident in his autobiography, where he writes in the third person.
That became the image of the dentist that stuck in his mind. A man making phone calls as a woman knelt at his feet.
And so Rushdie and Essaoury got to know each other pretty well, but I'm not sure they were exactly close. I asked Essaoury if he liked Rushdie. He paused for a long time and said, I think even Salman's family struggled to like him.
But after months of calls, the two men finally arranged a meeting. Almost immediately, they got into a heated theological debate, in which Essaoury said to him,
You really are arguing with these people, but you're not one of them. You're not on the same plane, because you don't have anything in common. You're not a Muslim. I said, yes, I am.
After that, Essaoury became convinced Rushdie's faith was repressed, buried somewhere deep inside him. The author had grown up in a very liberal Muslim household. This is how his sister Samin describes it.
I think the extent of Salman's religious upbringing would have been once a year he was taken to the mosque on Eid. I suppose in quotes to pray, but when he asked what he should do, and he was told that when they go down, you go down, when they get up, you get up.
But Rushdie always said he had a nagging God-shaped hole where his faith had once been. That was what the dentist seized upon, and he was pretty persuasive. Here's how Rushdie remembered it in his biography.
Every time he called Essaoury, he was aware of being lured further and further into a space from which he would find it difficult to withdraw. Yet he continued to call, and Essaoury allowed him to take his time slowly, at his own speed, with many retreats and evasions, to where the hook waited for his willing mouth.
On Christmas Eve that year, Special Branch escorted Salman Rushdie into a room in the basement of Paddington Green Police Station, perhaps the most secure facility in the UK. Sitting behind a long table were 6 Muslim clerics, including 2 from Essaoury's mosque in Regent's Park. He'd even invited an Egyptian minister. There, Rushdie entered into an agreement. He would reaffirm his faith, publicly state that he didn't agree with the insulting comments spoken by the characters in his book, and promised not to allow Penguin to release a paperback of the satanic verses. In return, Essaoury, with the help of the other men in the room, would try to persuade the Muslim world to forgive him. The next day, Hisham el-Essaoury hosted a very strange press conference. He sat alone at a table facing a large crowd of journalists. In front of him was a blue phone.
Hello? Yes, hello. Well, we just started. You're on time. Well, this is Rushdie now at the phone.
Firstly, I wish to say that this is the community which is closest to my heart, and for me to come closer to it is, for me, a great source of joy. And I was happy.
Later that day, Rushdie spoke to the BBC.
I have no quarrel with the central tenets of Islam, which is the oneness of God and the validity of the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad.
So you're a believer?
I am able to accept the central principle of Islam.
So that effectively you are a Muslim?
So that effectively, yes, I would now be prepared to say that.
I don't think any of us really believed it. Everyone thought, oh, we're just going to try that now to get out of it.
Rushdie hadn't told anyone about his plans to reaffirm his faith. And so his friend, Hanif Qureshi, heard the news over the radio like everyone else.
No, I didn't think he was sincere about it. I didn't think sincerity was important at all. Why would you want to be sincere? You just say what you need to say and hope that these bearded ones will bugger off.
I remember Hisham being overjoyed.
This is Elaine, Hisham al-Essawi's wife.
And he came to tell us that Salman Rushdie is now a Muslim. And I was happy. Hisham was delighted. I was sceptical.
Close friend Bill Buford was hosting Rushdie over Christmas.
That was a complicated day. He was in a bad moment, I would say. I think it was a moment of loneliness and doubt and exhaustion.
Years later, Rushdie recorded a diary entry he made a week after he reaffirmed his faith.
Ever since I made my compromise with the Muslim scholars on Christmas Eve, I've been feeling sick. Sick at heart and in my stomach. This isn't me. It isn't me. I speak to my sister. She says, "What have you done? Have you gone mad?"
Salman Rushdie didn't get the reaction he hoped for from the Muslim world. Most people who were hostile towards him when he was an atheist remained hostile even after he said he was a Muslim. And within weeks, Rushdie was backtracking. At that point, he turned on the dentist, saying he'd manipulated him when he was at his lowest ebb. He called Essawi the kind of Muslim who forces his wife to sit at his feet, cutting his toenails.
He made his break with the dentist and left those well-manicured toenails behind forever.
Now Rushdie turned his attention to the paperback edition of the Satanic Verses. But Penguin, his publisher, was reluctant to publish it, in case they stirred things up again. In the end, the head of Penguin, Peter Mayer, called a meeting of senior staff to decide what to do.
We took a vote and it divided entirely equally, as it were 13 votes in favour of publication, 13 against.
James was a Penguin employee at the time. We're not using his real name because he remains a target of the fatwa himself. He remembers people making persuasive arguments both for and against publishing the paperback edition.
And we had a break. We went back, there was more discussions. We took another vote, and one person had changed her mind and she voted for publication this time. The decision was taken, and the idea was that we would publish very, very quickly. I went to bed and was awoken at some point early in the morning by Peter Mayer, who was flying back to New York to say, "Have you heard the news?" There was a Penguin book store within Limited. Somebody had thrown a small incendiary device in it. And Peter said to me, I can't do it. I can't take the responsibility of other people's lives for a book.
His fear would turn out to be well-founded.
Next time on Fatwa.
It's going to take more than 5 minutes, he said. They're trying to kill me.
Episode 9. I've got a problem here.
It's a miracle that he survived. I think it was a shocking picture of a new time, of a new world.
Fatwa was produced by Chloe Hatch-Mateo. Originally broadcast in 2019, you can listen to the series from the beginning on BBC Sounds. As we'll hear shortly in the news, Britain's third woman Prime Minister is just getting her feet under the desk at number 10. What sort of leader will she be? Well, that's a question for Woman's Hour, coming up in a couple of minutes.
As the curtain begins to fall on another year at the BBC Proms, relive an incredible summer of live music with BBC Sounds. Recapture every moment of tension, vitality, and joy as we embark on our final adventure. And you're invited. The last night of the proms on Saturday night at 7:15 on BBC Sounds.
BBC Radio 4.
BBC News at 10 o'clock. Liz Truss has chaired her first cabinet meeting since becoming Prime Minister. She's made tackling rising energy bills a top priority. It's understood that a typical household's annual gas and electricity bill could be capped at around £2,500. The precise details of any support for businesses has yet to be confirmed. Paul Johnson, the director of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, says a blanket approach is wrong.
The majority of the money will go to better off people who use more energy. So this is very poorly targeted, and not only is it poorly targeted, it also means that we don't see, and including better off people, don't see the full price signal that actually across the world people need to see. I mean, the reason that gas prices are so high is because there's less gas around, and if the world doesn't use less gas over the next year, then we're going to run out.
Around the cabinet table were some of Miss Truss's closest allies, including Kwasi Kwarteng, who's become the Chancellor, and Therese Coffey, who's the new Health Secretary. But the Prime Minister is already facing questions from some Tory MPs about the widespread promotion of loyalists. 4 men arrested in connection with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell have been given conditional bail. Police in Liverpool say they still need to build up a strong evidential picture. President Putin has warned that Russia could try to limit the countries that can receive grain shipments from Ukraine. He claimed most of the ships that have left the country under a UN deal have been travelling to developed countries. Kiev says it does not see any reason to amend the agreement. The FBI reportedly found documents containing information about a foreign power's nuclear and defence capabilities when it searched President Trump's house. The Washington Post says a total of 11,000 items were seized during last month's raid. Scientists studying wild chimpanzees in Uganda have found that each animal has their own signature drumming style. The chimps use tree roots to hammer out messages to each other over long distances. BBC News.
BBC Radio 4. It's time for Woman's Hour with Emma Barnett.
Good morning and welcome to the programme. The country is now being run by not one, but 2 women. Liz Truss as Prime Minister and her great pal and political colleague, Theresa Coffey, as Deputy Prime Minister, also the new Health Secretary. As the 4th since last year of June, we have had 4 Health Secretaries, and also looking at the number of Prime Ministers shortly and what they're going to be offering us, will come to my guests. But Theresa Coffey spoke to my colleagues on the Today programme earlier today, and this is what she had to say.
We know this is a challenge. What I've seen from the Prime Minister is actually how excited and focused she is to deliver, and that's why I've supported Liz for many reasons, not just because she's my friend, far from it. It's because I think she's the person who can get on, get the grip, and make sure that we deliver for the people of this country.
Well, some have talked about an old girls' club replacing the old boys' club. Others care little for the personnel or for the fact that for the first time none of the highest offices of state are held by a white man. The hunger, instead, is to know what the Prime Minister will do with her new power. Prime Minister Truss has met her new cabinet this morning, and dominating the conversation like COVID and Brexit before it is one topic: energy prices. Tomorrow we will have more of an idea of what her plan is in this regard, but first at 12 today she'll be at the dispatch box in the House of Commons for her first Prime Minister's questions, across from Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party. Where are you at this morning? Excitement in your house about a new Prime Minister, a new chapter, benefit of the doubt being given? You could have, of course, voted for her if you're a member of the Conservative Party, or would have done if you were given the chance. Or do you feel more along the lines of the Daily Mirror newspaper headline writers this morning? After 12 years of Conservative rule, beleaguered and impatient for Liz Truss to fix the Britain her party and the 3 previous Conservative Prime Ministers, as they put it, broke. Well, you can text me here at the programme. The number is 84844. Text will be charged your standard message rate. On social media, at BBC Woman's Hour. Email me through the Woman's Hour website. Or go on, try sending me a voice note on WhatsApp or a message through WhatsApp on 03700 100 444. You may wish to use Wi-Fi because data charges can apply. Also on today's programme, we'll be hearing how it is to leave a strict religious community in this country and survive life on the outside. One woman tells all very bravely too, the untold stories of haggitude, hags with attitude, a psychologist and author on how to become an elder, not elderly, and the female entrepreneur who came to this country as a refugee from Afghanistan as a child, who just can't seem to stop winning awards. All that to come. But first, a new Prime Minister, the third female Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, is installed in Britain's most famous London cul-de-sac. Liz Truss, of course the former Foreign Secretary and Women and Equalities Minister, today has her first full day in number 10. We asked to speak to the new Prime Minister this morning, but as I mentioned, it is a busy day. Last time I spoke to Liz Truss, it was actually after the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe from imprisonment in Iran, and during that exchange on this programme, I asked her this. Perhaps I could ask you to commit, with time when it isn't as frantic, to come and do a phone-in here with the listeners of Woman's Hour on what women would like, because they do have a lot of questions for you that we aren't able to get through today.
I'd like them to do that, Emma.
Thank you very much. I'll take that as a yes when your diary is freer. Well, the invite is still open. We would love for her to come, especially now she's Prime Minister. But of course, we're also waiting to hear who will be the new Women and Equalities Minister. Some of those junior positions not yet appointed, or maybe they have been. As I'm talking, Camilla Tominey, a woman in the know, Associate Editor at the Daily Telegraph. Have we missed a lot in the last 5 minutes? Things are moving.
My phone here, Emma, to see if there's any more ministerial appointments that I can't see. As you know, though, the Wi-Fi is notoriously bad in the Millbank the BBC studio, so I haven't got anything through yet.
That's our Westminster bit, if people don't know Millbank. How's she doing so far? Are you feeling inspired at the Daily Telegraph? Are you all pumped up?
Well, we've done quite a pumped up front page, and actually I think it was a pretty solid performance yesterday. It wasn't going to start winning any awards for oratory, but then maybe people are actually quite welcoming of somebody who's a complete break from Boris Johnson. We had him being quite boosterish in the morning and almost pretending like Britain didn't have any problems. And then Liz Truss emerging in the afternoon, basically setting out an agenda to deal with what is the biggest and most sort of troublesome in-tray that a Prime Minister has seen since the 1970s. So maybe it's not the time for sort of joking and clowning around, and a degree of seriousness is needed.
She does make a lot of, in fact, I think we put together a bit of a montage of her saying this, that she gets the job done. That seems to be what she, and then we heard her friend Therese Coffey this morning saying very similarly.
Yes, and she's all about delivery, right? So some comparisons have been made to Deliveroo. And obviously, she's already a hate figure among the Twitterati, but that was always going to be the case. The interesting thing about Truss, I think, is she cares less what people think of her than Boris Johnson ever did. She's not necessarily a pleaser. I think the idea is for her maybe not to be liked by swathes of the country, but like Thatcher, to at least be respected for having an ideological vision and also a clarity of purpose when it comes to policy making. I mean, this idea of expediting what we think is going to be a cap on energy bills at £2,500, probably announcing that tomorrow rather than next week, shows that she understands that there's urgency needed, not least because we're 2 years out from another general election, and let's face it, the Tories are behind in the polls.
Is it true that she's good at delivery? I mean, I'm thinking back, she's had a lot of roles in short succession, especially if you look at international trade, which interestingly has gone to Kemi Badenoch, the other woman who was doing extremely well in that race and was potentially going to go to the final two at one point. There was and has been criticism that much of what she talked about and posted many photos of doing on Instagram and travelling the world, many of them were rollover deals. There were deals that were already in place, and the achievement was not much to boast about.
Well, I think she'd argue the opposite, that she
would. I've had that argument with her. But I'm asking politically, I think, is her record as good as she's saying, I get the job done? When you look across, how was she received by those in the legal field when she was Lord Chancellor?
Well, I think her argument will be that she is one of the most experienced politicians in top senior ranks today, and therefore she has got that pedigree. To be fair, she often talks about this idea that the levers of power in government just don't operate quickly enough, that everything takes an eternity to get done. So I do also, there was a degree, wasn't there, I think, of indecision. I remember one cabinet minister talking about meetings with Boris Johnson where he displayed something called a sort of strange silence, where he'd go around the room, ask people for their opinion, and then everyone would go, right, what's going to be decided? And nothing ever was. I can't see Truss operating in that way. Obviously, we've seen this image of cabinet meeting for the first time this morning. The idea about her surrounded by loyalists perhaps seems a bit continuity. That was the criticism of Johnson, that he had too many yes men and women there. But then I also asked myself the question, who would you be surrounding yourself with? Your enemies?
No, of course, and that's what you do. You have your allies. It's just whether they're people who answer back to you. That's always the concern, and don't just. Well, if there are decisions being made, as you're saying, perhaps there weren't before in quite the way people were hoping, will they challenge them enough? We have mentioned Therese Coffey. The idea, you've written about this, you've looked into their bond, the idea of them being political soulmates. What does that mean?
Once told her the story of a lost pigeon and a pomegranate tree. She took out the brooch her brother had given her and stared at the pigeon blood rubies.
A week later, she placed the brooch and the letter in an envelope for her Turkish husband and her Turkish son. And she left with her brother for San Francisco.
The son she left behind.
You wish to know his name? Levant. Levant Kazancı, your father.
My father?
Your father, forever embittered by the mother who abandoned him. And where is that brooch now, master? The pomegranate brooch.
You know full well.
You see, master, you are also part Armenian. Your whole family is. Is that not funny, master? Your gentle grandfather who married the Armenian child, Shusha, who abandoned him and their Turkish son, your father, and then left for San Francisco to start a new family, an Armenian family, and whose granddaughter, Armanoush, sleeps right now in this very house, whilst their American mother flies through the air with her husband, Mustafa, your brother, who brings the truth to this house. The truth. What will you do about that, master?
But Auntie Banu was now holding her talisman and uttering holy words from the Quran. And this finally silenced Mr. Bitterheart.
Honey, is Turkish food spicy?
Well, Rosa.
I picked up some Texan spicy sauce, in case the food sucks.
My family's food.
No, the food on the plane.
Right.
Oh, thank you. Wow, it's so great all the drinks are free. I guess I wasn't sure there'd be any, on the flight, with it being a Turkish airline and all. Are you okay, sweetie? You look a little bit peaky.
I'm fine. All good.
Looking forward to seeing your folks.
Sure.
The light was still on in Zaliha's room, my master's youngest and most favorite of sisters. She was asleep, slumped across her bed with an empty vodka bottle on the floor.
My master hid the bottle under the bed, and then smoothed over the sheet, tucking her sister in. She opened the window to let in the sea wind and looked at us, her jinn, watching as ever from her shoulders. And Auntie Banu bent down and kissed her beautiful sister's forehead, whispered words of protection over her as she slept, and left the room, taking us, her jinn, with her. Streets of Istanbul and down to the cafe she frequented.
Your favorite cafe?
Yeah.
Where I'll meet all your friends?
Yes.
You weren't going to take me, were you?
I was. Well, I think I was. I can't believe you didn't tell your parents you were coming to Istanbul.
No. Well, they would have stopped me from coming.
So you lied. That is so cool. Cigarette?
No, thanks. I still don't smoke.
You should try it.
I can't help feeling that there's something that's not right. There's something my mom's not telling me.
But she seemed okay when you spoke to her.
Well, that's it. She was too okay. I take off to Istanbul without telling her. And though she's relieved to find me, she wasn't angry or anything. It doesn't make sense. My mom doesn't travel anywhere. She barely goes out of Arizona.
The cafe's just down there. So shall I introduce you as Amy or Armanoush?
I don't mind. Should I be Armenian or American? You choose. You know your friends.
They won't mind. They're poets and writers and a cartoonist.
You what?
Well, my cartoonist. You still look peaky. Are you sure you're just tired, honey?
Yes.
You gonna get some shut-eye?
You should try to get some sleep too.
I think I might. Oh, if you got those eye patches there, would you pass them to me, please? Oh, it's so cute. It's all in a package. Look, there's a little toothbrush and a toothpaste. They're so dinky. Rose settled, placing the eye mask over her eyes, plunging herself into darkness, and Mustafa looked around the cabin. There was a woman standing in the aisle, leaning over a fellow passenger, talking. She was Turkish and wearing a short skirt. Mustafa Kazanca looked away, squeezing his wife's hand as he did so. But she was already asleep.
Amy. You can call me Amy.
Amy. That's a sweet name.
Said the talentless poet.
Thank you.
Your wife, Amy?
No, thanks. I'm fine with my coffee.
So sweet. It's not her real name.
Why are you smiling, Asya? I know that smile.
Said the political cartoonist.
And Armanoush. Armanoush Chakmakchian.
Armanoush Chakmakchian, huh?
That's an Armenian name.
And all eyes turned to Armanoush.
I'm Armenian.
Armanoush to Istanbul.
They were Istanbulites, her family. They were made for all Spain in 1980. So many died during the nation. Great grand. He was a writer. Now the intellectuals were killed first, obviously.
It was then that the scriptwriter known for the ultra-patriotic TV series, The Moor.
That didn't happen, you know?
Oh, really?
Look, I'm very sorry for your family, Amy or Armanoush.
Thank you.
But you have to understand, it was a time of war.
People died on both sides. Do you have any idea how many Turks died at the hands of the Armenian rebels? How about the suffering of the Turkish families? You need to understand that 1915 is not now. Times were different back then. There was no Turkish state then. It was the Ottoman Empire.
Okay. I thought you weren't a nationalist.
Yeah, you're always saying you only write that series because the money's good.
I'm not a nationalist, but I do respect historical truths. People have been brainwashed.
Maybe you have been brainwashed. Yeah. What do you know about 1915?
My job. Exaggeration and distortion. I mean, come on. Something with as many as 2 million? Who in the right mind would take that?
You see, so American children swear allegiance to their flag every day, and your friend comes here. That's not what I've done.
She's not attacking us.
Things what you want. This is fine.
Hysteria.
What does that mean? What the hell does that mean?
Collective hysteria. Driven by a few individuals. I mean, if you hear a story over and over enough times, you come to believe it, don't you?
Hysteria is that nationalist Turk man, Timur the Lionheart, the muscular Turk running from one ridiculous adventure to another to fight the evil Byzantine. You make millions of people into nationalist. Now, that's collective.
You know I don't.
But that's the thing. What you do is even worse, because you don't even believe in it. Hypocrite.
Who do you think you are to talk to me about hypocrisy? Little Miss Bastard.
What?
What did you call her?
A bastard. Because that's what she is.
Say that again.
Bastard. Your little girlfriend here is a bastard.
Oh my god.
And that's when the fight broke out.
Hey, arkadaşlar bir dakika yavaş. Sakin lütfen.
My master was in the kitchen, making ashuri, as instructed by her mother, Gülsüm, adding the final ingredients to the simmering pot. Hazelnuts, pine nuts, golden raisins, dried figs, apricots, rose water, and you want an yes, I know. Ashore was his favorite.
Yes, you said.
Expose of it. I had made them think. Did well. I couldn't scold him. Greedy boy, I said. Greedy boy. From then on, I always made extra for him. Extra for my son. And now he's coming home. And he's coming home. Where is Feride? Is she helping to prepare?
Yes,
Of course, mother. And Zeliha? In her own way. Which means she's doing nothing. Why do you always protect her? I've booked a taxi. What for?
to collect them from the airport.
A taxi? You have to collect them, Zeliha.
I'm not going.
But you're the only one who can drive.
That's why I ordered the taxi.
Taxi? We can't send the taxi. You know we can't, Zeliha.
Right.
Cancel it. He's my son. We can't send the taxi. We have to go and greet him. We're not like Germans who pack their mothers into homes and forget about them.
That's what Mustafa has done.
He's your brother. He's your blood.
That is true.
You have to drive her. You have to go home.
Are the girls back?
They're in the other room.
Alright. Yes, 6? Well, it's a 6 again. Lucky. It's beginner's luck. Your turn. Do they often do that?
Do what?
Fight?
Never. It's a first. You must have brought it out in them. A 3, you're winning.
I'm going to the airport to pick them up.
Can I come with you?
Yes, Armanish, of course.
And me?
No,
What?
I don't want you to come.
I'm coming.
No, you're not, miss.
Why not?
Someone has got to stay and help Auntie Banu.
Why?
No! Asya, no.
But Auntie Zelia.
No.
What have I done this
Nothing.
time?
You've done nothing.
Unless it's my very existence that upsets you.
Whatever do you mean, Asya?
You heard.
You can't come, that's all.
Auntie.
No.
I'll stay here. We can help Banu together. Mom won't mind. Right.
Okay.
Well, there, I'm off.
Zelia. Zelia. Wait, Zelia.
Why wouldn't she let you go?
I don't know. I never know with her. Here, help me stir the Ashuri, and I'll tell you a story.
I should warn you, Auntie Banu loves her stories.
Because you can learn so much from a story.
I would love to hear your story.
No. There was once a man who decided to travel the globe round and round, never stopping, in the hope that he would escape death. North and south, east and west, he went every which way he could. And then, on one of his numerous trips, he unexpectedly ran with the angel. He was encouraged when he saw him, looking at him. Piercing expression. Well, the man abandoned Cairo right away, traveling non-stop until he had arrived in a small, sleepy town in northern China. Now, thirsty and tired, he rushed into the first tavern he could find, and there, in a corner of the bar, sat Azrael, patiently waiting for him. And he had a relieved expression on his face. I was so surprised to run into you in Cairo, he rasped to the man, for your destiny said that it was here in China that we two would meet.
Oh my God. What is it? Why didn't I see this before?
What?
I can understand how they knew that I wasn't with either of them. My father hadn't spoken to my mother for years. I thought that something had happened to my mom, but of course it must be my father. That must be how she found out. It must be. What time is it?
Call them.
Yeah. Can I call them from your room?
Of course. The two girls went into Asia's room, and Armanouche called her father in San Francisco.
Okay.
Asia watched Armanouche's face as she made the call and saw the terrible sadness that fell across it as she learned what had happened.
I understand. Okay. Love you.
Then she put the phone down. And
it's my grandma, she's dead. She's dead. I know it's so to tell me, and that I knew I wasn't with her. I was going to tell her about coming here, going to where she lived, and now I can't.
It'll be okay. At that moment, Mustafa and God were somewhere in the skies, but in the shot was no longer talking to her, but Mustafa could still see the edge of the field sticking out from her seat. And as the announcement came, the good making the memory he took against everything that happened.
anything I want as loud as I want.
Why do you wear those short skirts?
Jerk.
And that's my razor blade.
Is it?
You've stolen it to shave your legs, so you can show them off to all the men in the neighborhood.
Why don't you go and busy yourself somewhere else? Masturbate or something.
You have no shame. You dress like a whore and then demand respect.
Why? Are you scared of whores?
Have you been spying on me?
What? No. If you go to prostitutes, I couldn't care less.
If father were here, you wouldn't dare talk like that. Just because he's gone doesn't mean there are no rules. With father dead, I'm in charge of the family.
You know what your problem is? You're spoiled. A little prince. Well, no one tells me what to do, precious little phallus.
Say that again.
She escaped the first slap, but that infuriated him more, and the next caught her hard against her cheek. She fell backwards, and then he was on top of her. She tried to stop him, but he held her arm around her back and pushed her down onto the bed. When it ended, he slumped off her, wiping himself, and left.
Mustafa turned to his wife, sitting next to him looking over the presents she had bought for his family. A cactus bed, a cactus snow globe, Mustafa had never told anyone of how one day when she was only 19, he had raped his sister Zaliha, and of how the shame had forced him to live forever away from his homeland and never return. Until now. He squeezed his wife's hand, kissed her on the cheek, and stroked the nape of her neck. What's got into you, sweetie?
Nothing, sweetheart. Nothing.
And the pilot announced their descent into Istanbul.
Once in a land far, far away, there was an old couple who lived with their 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. One daughter was ugly, and the other beautiful. The youngest brother decided to marry the beautiful one, but she did not want to. She washed her silk clothes and went to the water to rinse them. She rinsed and cried. It was cold. Her hands and feet were freezing. She came home and knocked on the door, but it was locked. She knocked on her mother's window, and her mother answered, "I will let you in if you call me mother-in-law." She knocked on her father's window, and he answered, "I will let you in if you call me father-in-law." She knocked on her elder brother's window, and he said, "I will let you in if you call me brother-in-law." She knocked on her sister's window, and she said, "I will let you in if you call me sister-in-law." She knocked on her younger brother's window, and he let her in. He hugged her and kissed her, and she said, "Let the earth open up and swallow me." And the earth opened up, and she fled into an underground kingdom. When Mr. Bitter had first told our master Banu the terrible truth, the crime of her brother, she had refused to accept it. She had fought what her heart would not allow, until the truth sounded so loudly she could not keep it out.
What will you do now, master?
Will you give the American girl her brooch back? What will you say to your brother? What will you do with so many truths in your head? Do they not hurt you? Won't you do what is right and tell everyone the truth? For what harm is there in knowledge?
And again my master silenced Mr. Bitter by touching the talisman around her neck and muttering the holy words of the Quran. Rose and Mustafa spent their first 2 days in Istanbul eating and answering questions. How was life in America? Was there really a desert in Arizona? Was it true that Americans survived on vast portions of fast food? Was the American apprentice better than the Turkish one? Rose appeared to enjoy the explanation. And Mustafa fell gradually more and more silent, until he spent most of the day reading newspapers whilst the women talked and shopped. On the second evening, after dinner, the conversation turned to politics. They spoke in Turkish, Armanoush and her mother unable to follow. Zeliha was sitting at the end of the table, painting her nails a bright cherry red. Asya was sitting next to her mother, who had fallen uncharacteristically silent during her brother's visit.
So this new government?
Rascals, a lot of them.
Wasn't he voted in again?
He has close to supreme power.
But he won.
Only just. They're all as bad as each other, utterly corrupt, all of them liars. The only institution we can trust is the army. Thank Allah we have a Turkish army.
Mine?
Yes, yours, Mustafa. You left before you could complete it.
Well, as long as I pay a fee and live in America, I don't have to do it.
In any case, are you not too old for the army, Uncle?
You're eligible for training until 41.
And you're what, 40?
Mm-hmm.
And it was at this point that Zeliha, still looking at her nails as she painted them, spoke.
What a fateful age. The age our father died, just like his father and grandfather before him. You must be nervous now you're 40, my brother. So close to death.
Auntie, how can you talk to your brother like that, Zeliha?
I can say whatever I want to whomever I want.
You shame me.
I shame you?
Get out, miss. Get out of my house right away.
On the third day of their visit, Mustafa stayed in his room all day, explaining that he felt under the weather. It was true that his face was drawn, his mouth dry and his eyes bloodshot. For hours on end he stayed in bed looking up at the ceiling. Rose went out with Feride, Armanoush and Atya to do more shopping. Came home exhausted and went to bed early that night.
Good day.
Awesome.
Oh, I got so many things. I'm tired now, sweetie. I'll show you in the morning.
Your family is so nice. Are you feeling any better?
Rose, honey, sweetheart. Well, we need to fly back. Let's fly back tomorrow.
Are you crazy? I'm still jet-lagged.
Why are you so antsy? Can't you bear to see your family for a few days? And she rolled over and within minutes was fast asleep. Mustafa lay there in the dim light for a long time, unable to sleep, until he heard a gentle knock on the door and a crack of light spilling into the room. It was our master Banu, his eldest sister. Can I come in? You haven't come downstairs all day, and I wanted to check on you.
I haven't been feeling well.
Here, my brother.
I brought you some ashure. I decorated it especially for you. Silver almonds and pomegranate seeds.
Thank you. You are so kind.
She's fast asleep.
Yes, she's tired. Long day. Shopping.
Yes.
I wanted to ask.
Yes, brother.
Well, Mother said that Asia's father, she said that that there wasn't a boyfriend.
Not that I know of. And what difference does that make now?
So, no one knows who...
Asia grew up without a father. She doesn't know who he is. Neither does the family. Only Zeliha, of course. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
It smells of almonds.
Yes.
Shall I take it? Or leave it? It's your choice.
The ashure.
Yes. Mustafa. Petrified. Understanding what Banu is saying to him, Mustafa closes his eyes. But even behind his closed lids, he can still see the sharp, piercing gaze of his eldest sister. And with his eyes shut, he thought he saw on his sister's left shoulder another pair of eyes, glittering in the dark, hollow and blood-curdling. But all of this must have been a dream, because when Mustafa Kazanja opens his eyes again, he is alone in the room with his wife, and beside him is a bowl of ashure.
Having reached the age of 40, Mustafa Kazanji, as a Kazanji man, knows his death is close. So what difference would one day make, more or less? He had sought to erase his past, only to find it standing next to him in the form of a small bowl of ashure. Knowingly and willingly, he reaches out for the dessert. It is such a relief to walk out on his past and on his future at once. Seconds after finishing the ashure, he is seized by abdominal cramps. 2 minutes later, and his breathing stops.
What are you doing? I've got an onion. I can't see that. I mean, why are you holding it up to my face? Because you have to cry. I do? Yes. Otherwise, our neighbors, Mustafa's wife, and certainly the professional mourners. I thought we weren't going to book any. They will think something is wrong. Oh, look sad, Zeliha. Right, and sniff the onion. What are you doing? Asia, how are our guests? Distraught, well, roses, and also confused, I think. It's not normal, is it, to have him laid out like that in the sitting room? I've never seen a Muslim funeral where that happens. It's what we wanted. Well, it's what your granny wanted. No, I don't suppose she'll ever get over it, Grandma, will she? No. You've got a bit of onion on your chin. Oh, thank you. Are we going back in? I will in a minute. Just let me feed Pasha, then he'll stop bothering the guests. Poor cat.
me, I have no idea what's going on here. Do you?
Not really, Mom.
Could you find out what they're going to do with his body?
Sure.
I mean, where are they planning to bury him?
I'm sure they know what they're doing.
Do they? I mean, why is that woman howling? Does she know Mustafa?
They're professional mourners, Mom.
It's a profession. Mourning? I don't understand. Are you all right, darling?
Yes, Mom.
I was sorry, though she never liked me. You know, I was sorry to hear about your grandma.
I know, Mom. I know.
Oh, Amy.
Slowly the wake dispersed, leaving the body of Mustafa laid out in the sitting room. Gülsüm, Mustafa's mother, went to bed, and Armanoush went to lie next to her heartbroken mother. And it was then, after the guests had gone, that Zeliha silently sat down next to her daughter Asya and took her hand in hers.
This man here. My uncle? Yes.
What about my uncle?
When I was your age.
What?
When I was your age, he hurt you?
My daughter. My wonderful daughter, so defiant, so angry. So much of me, my beautiful daughter.
How did he hurt you?
Auntie, Mother, how did he hurt you? Mom. Oh, I see. Auntie, Mother, he's my...
Yes, it's him.
Your brother?
Yes.
So you couldn't tell anyone? Mother.
And Asya kissed her mother, and then went to look at her father as he lay there. And under her breath, she muttered,
Papa,
she said.
Papa.
Who is to say, if Shushan had not been an orphan, if she had not lost her family and then found it, if she had not abandoned her son, if the son, Mustafa's father, had not handed down his bitterness, then all these things might have been different, and the pomegranate brooch would not now lie in Auntie Banu's jewelry box.
Auntie Banu, our master, never told Armanoush the story of the brooch and how it belonged to her grandmother. For which of us believes stories that are learned through magic? Nor did anyone else in the family come to know who Asya's real father was. But the wall that had separated Asya and her mother was no longer there, and they grew closer and happier together. Later that day, Auntie Banu watched her sister and her niece walk out into the garden, carrying tea glasses, each filled with hot tea to drink under the fading sky.
What have you done, Master? You intervene in the ways of the world.
I gave him the ashure, but it was he who chose to eat it. Allah will never forgive me. I am ostracized forever from the world of the virtuous.
I will never go to heaven, but be thrown into the flames of hell. But Allah knows there is little regret in my heart. My brother wished to be free of the past.
Does she not look different, your sister?
She's told her daughter.
Yes.
The salty sea breeze caressed Zeliha and Asya, mixed with the faint scent of almond blossom as they drank their tea.
Yeah, I bought these cups 19 years ago. Well, a little over. And yet here they are still, unchipped and unbroken.
Pasha V, the latest in a long line of Kazanja cats, slowly padded out to sit with them, jumping onto Zeliha's lap before settling down for a nap. But as he did so, he felt a drop of rain against his nose, and then another. He rose slowly and jumped off. Another drop, and he quickened his pace. But Zeliha and Asya remained, one looking up at the clouds, the other slowly rotating the tea glass in her hand, as she watched the cat padding down the path and back into the house.
The cat doesn't know. What doesn't he know? That whatever falls from the sky shall not be cursed. And that includes the rain. How is your tea, my daughter?
Good.
It's good.
Part 2 of The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak was dramatized by Hattie Naylor.
Mr. Bitter was played by Rad Rawi.
Mrs. Sweet and Rose by Laura Lefko.
Asya was Lara Sawala.
Zeliha, Natalie Armin.
Banu, Mia Soteriou.
Armanouche was Gillian Saker.
Mustafa, Philip Arditi.
Gülsüm, Anna Sava.
Feride, Baris Celilolu.
Avanes, Jonas Khan.
Cartoonist, Murak Erkek.
And poet, Katrina Sterling.
Other voices were played by the cast. The Bastard of Istanbul was produced and directed by Nicholas Jackson and is an Aphonica production for BBC Radio 4.
A mi niña junto a la bañera, envuelta en la toalla y el pelo mojado y su cara morena, me dice papá, hijito, no quiero ser princesa, que es lo que quiero ser cuando yo sea mayor, es capitán pirata con mi espada y mi cañón, y su ocurrencia me emocionó. Y pensé pa' mis adentro que aunque se sequen los 7 mares, a estas nuevas hembras libres no habrá patriarca que ella las pare. No hay quien las pare, no hay quien las pare. Y pensé, por ti pensé, que en mucho tiempo de oscuridad tú vas a abrirnos todas las ventanas, porque sé que harás la guerra, quien te haga guerra y arrancarán las negras manzanas de tiranos y tiranas. Yo sé que te enfrentarás sin miedo a las dictaduras de los machirulos y las feminulas, sin obedecer ni a hombre ni a mujer. No será esclava ni borrega, como es hoy la gente, no será sumisa, dócil ni obediente.
El hogar al homme y hacer la lomlomce o la lomlomlomce. Bueno, todo esto es un caos. La política tiene que dar estabilidad, no tiene que dar caos. Y los docentes a veces tenemos la sensación de que esto es un cafarnaúm, como decimos en Cataluña, esto es un caos. Entonces alguien debe poner coto a esta situación de desorientación, ¿no? Donde es que, imagine, han pasado las nuevas selectividades que dicen que son competenciales. La selectividad ya era práctica. Los
Entrant a RAC1.cat, el portal de notícies de RAC1.
Lo de ayer puede servir de experiencia también para saber cómo encarar esos back-to-back que se dice ahora.
Sí, para nosotros el partido de ayer es un palo porque encima veníamos avisados por parte de Sergio, por parte de pues, jugadores que ya habían vivido esto y pues fue un palo grande para nosotros. Pero bueno, ahora ya sabemos lo que es y esperemos que al menos estemos concentrados y no nos vuelva a pasar lo mismo.
Jaime Pradilla, muchísimas gracias. A terminar bien la primera fase de este Eurobasket.
Vale, muchas gracias.
Norberto, España juega mañana, lo recuerdo, contra Montenegro a las 4:15, pero que ha dado de sí, que está dando de sí la jornada de hoy en el Eurobasket.
Pues si te parece, José María, vamos con lo más reciente, con lo que está ahora mismo en juego. 2 partidos para cerrar el grupo C y D. Y ojo, me quedo con el partido de Serbia. Tiempo de descanso, José María. Apunta. Serbia 62-34 Finlandia. Ya hay 3 jugadores de la selección serbia con doble al descanso. Va a conseguir la tercera victoria. Va a estar ya matemáticamente clasificada para Berlín. Al igual que con Grecia en el grupo C en este caso, porque ganó por 93-77 a Gran Bretaña, por lo tanto, tercera victoria consecutiva y ya está en la siguiente ronda, falta de 2 partidos, la selección griega de los Antetokounmpo. Y también déjame decirte que está en juego también en el grupo C, en Ucrania 38-42 Italia, bastante más igualado. El otro partido celebrado hoy en el grupo D nos ha dejado la victoria de la República Checa por 88-80 frente a los Países Bajos y también la victoria por muy ajustada de Croacia por 73-70 frente a Letonia, al igual que la victoria de Polonia en el grupo D con Israel. Bastante igualdad en alguno de los grupos, sobre todo del segundo al tercer puesto.
Sí, va a estar realmente interesante y misterioso este Eurobasket, que todavía no sabemos a dónde va a romper Norberto González, José Vicente Arnaiz y Jaime Pradilla. Un abrazo muy fuerte y mañana os escuchamos con el España-Montenegro. ¡Chao!
Muy bien, amigo, abrazo grande.
Vamos terminando. Lo primero que nos dejamos, ¿a qué tenemos que estar pendiente en las próximas hores, Fernando?
De futbolistes pel mercat de fitxatges.
Sí.
Doncs avui la jornada no va d'esport, sinó que està molt marcada per la política i sobretot per la política internacional, que també n'hem parlat durant el programa. Però abans de tot, en l'àmbit autonòmic, s'ha parlat molt de l'inici avançat de curs, que també portem dies parlant-ne. També Pere Aragonès, que ha compartit imatges de la seva visita a un centre de Sant Feliu de Llobregat i ha dit literalment dia de retrobaments, de somriures i d'il·lusió per tornar a les escoles arreu de Catalunya. I de fet Catalunya, la paraula Catalunya, també és tendència per diverses temàtiques, des de la diada, per exemple, tota la qüestió que està ben sobre si es personificaran o no els polítics a la jornada i inclús també la detenció d'aquesta persona, comentàvem durant el programa, que presumptament volia fer un atemptat a Catalunya.
Aquest terrorista jihadista, no?
Exacte.
Està detingut a Empuriabrava.
Exacte. Llavors, més tendències ara sí a nivell més internacional. Per exemple, la tendència número 1 és Xile, després de refusar la nova Constitució, i de fet en aquest sentit també la paraula Pinochet, que s'ha fet tendència personatge, no? S'ha fet tendència a Twitter després d'una polèmica piulada del president de Colòmbia que ha tuitat ha reviscut Pinochet arran del que ha passat a Xile. Per aquest mateix motiu també la paraula Constitució, que està també de les més sonades a la xarxa. I a partir d'aquí, com et pots imaginar, cadascú ha començat a dir la seva, de bones i de dolentes. I una notícia que hem conegut al llarg de la tarda, que la comentaves tu també abans i que també se'n fa ressò a les xarxes, és la decisió de Macron de tancar la porta al MidCat, i és per això que també ha bullit bastant Twitter amb respostes negatives vers el president francès. I també Truss, com comentaves, que també és tendència al dia en què s'ha convertit en la primera ministra del Regne Unit, i els tuitaires també han recordat molt la persona de Margaret Thatcher.
Noms de dones, avui protagonistes en aquesta tarda en el panorama internacional i sobretot a Downing Street. Nosaltres ho deixem aquí. no hi ha programa ni de mà.
Electrodomésticos nuevos a bajo coste. Cocinas desde 499 euros. Encimera e instalación incluidas. Los mejores precios en electroventa a bajo coste. Parque Comercial Tecnocórdoba.
Ya está aquí, lo estabas esperando. El evento de atletismo del año en Córdoba para todos los amantes a las carreras. Tu cita el 17 de septiembre en las instalaciones municipales deportivas del Fontanar. Carreras nocturnas 10K, La Fuensanta y 5K Ciudad de Córdoba. Y todo el atletismo en pista. Campeonato provincial de todas estas disciplinas. Inscríbete ya. Bonificaciones por tramos de fecha. Y bonos a los clubes deportivos. Hasta el 14 de septiembre. Más información en clubatletismocordobés.com. La fiesta del atletismo te espera. Organiza Todo Atletismo, Ayuntamiento de Córdoba y Club Atletismo Cordobés.
Tú, que eres una luchadora.
Tú, que no conoces frenos.
Tú, que te esfuerzas por llegar lo más lejos posible.
Vosotras y vosotros tenéis una cita con el deporte y el mejor ambiente.
the last of the Mohicans, set amidst the struggle between the British and the French for control of North America. There's a new case for the #1 ladies detective agency on BBC Radio 4 Extra next week. Botswana's first ever female detective, Mara Motswe, finds herself dipping a toe into the murky world of local politics, while the agency investigates the unfair dismissal of a woman called Charity from a firm selling office furniture.
As a matter of interest, what did he say you said to him?
He said that I shouted at him that if he didn't like any of our desks, then he could go and build one himself. But I would never have said that, Ma. Never.
I am sure you wouldn't have. Tell me, Ma, do you have any enemies? Anybody who may really dislike you?
None that I know of. There is one person who dislikes me.
What is the real reason for Charity's dismissal? Alexander McCall-Smith's The #1 Ladies Detective Agency begins on Radio 4 Extra and BBC Sounds next Monday morning at 10 and again at 3.
This is BBC Radio 4 Extra.
11 o'clock. Hello, Jim Lee here, about to bring you the Friedland Files, in which Michael Friedland shares private recordings revealing some of the lesser-known stories of some of the great stars of stage and screen. Gene Kelly, Morecambe and Wise, Fred Astaire and James Stewart among them. And later here on 4 Extra, John MacDonald explores the strange backstory to the infamous 1975 Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier fight, The Thriller in Manila, at 2:30. First, in a programme that was made to mark the 90th Academy Awards ceremony in